In the early 1990s, the world of video gaming was rapidly evolving. Technological advancements were pushing the boundaries of what could be depicted on screen, resulting in increasingly realistic and graphic portrayals of violence. Politicians saw the fears of parents around the United States, worrying that their children will be exposed to this violence, and decided to capitalize on it. On December 1st, 1993, Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman and other officials called a press conference to raise awareness of what they were calling the new public health crisis: violent video games. And the most prominent example that the fun police wanted to show scared parents was the new video game sweeping the nation.
Mortal Kombat!
In the early 1990s, Midway Games wanted to create a new fighting game to compete with Capcom's Street Fighter II, which was dominating arcades. Ed Boon, the programmer, and John Tobias, the artist and writer, were tasked with creating this game, initially envisioning it as a Jean-Claude Van Damme video game based off his films Universal Soldier and Bloodsport. When the deal with Van Damme fell through, they instead focused on developing a fictional martial arts tournament, which became Mortal Kombat. Boon and Tobias designed Mortal Kombat with distinct characteristics that set it apart from any other fighting game. Instead of using traditional pixel art, Mortal Kombat employed digitized actors, creating a more realistic look for the characters. The game also introduced a diverse cast of characters, each with their own backstory and fighting style, such as Liu Kang, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Raiden. The creators even created a character based off of Jean-Claude Van Damme to make fun of the whole fallout, named Johnny Cage. But what really set Mortal Kombat apart was its graphic violence, especially the fatalities, finishing moves that allowed players to brutally kill their opponents in various ways. This feature became the game's signature, but also a focal point of the controversy.
When you take a look at all this, you have to wonder, is Mortal Kombat really suitable for kids?
It's training them to enjoy and like violence as a form of conflict resolution.
I bought this game because it contains the blood and violence that was represented in the arcade version.
Comes to $80.12.
There's certainly no indication of any kind of boycott of Mortal Kombat. In fact, by the time this store closes tonight, they expect to have sold more than 200 copies. And this is the game's first day on sale.
Mortal Kombat as an arcade game was big, but what made it a cultural phenomenon was in 1993, Mortal Kombat was starting to be ported to home consoles, including the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. The Mortal Kombat buzz for coming out to home consoles only took a few months to stir controversy, causing Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl to spearhead a series of congressional hearings to address concerns about violent video games in December of that year. Violent video games were not a novel concept. In the 1970s, an arcade hit, Death Race, angered adults for offering high scores to players who ran over pedestrians with their car. A Sega game series called Splatterhouse was based off 80s slasher films and featured plenty of gore. But Mortal Kombat seemed uniquely suited to strike at the heart of moral pundits. Senator Joe Lieberman found out about Mortal Kombat from his aide, Bob Anderson, whose son sought out the game for his Sega Genesis. When Anderson saw the gameplay, he asked Lieberman about it. Lieberman, who saw his congressional role partly as one of a moral judge, was shocked. He called a press conference on the steps of Capitol Hill to put the video game industry on notice. Few parents would buy these games for their kids if they really knew what was in them, Lieberman said during his press conference. We're talking about video games that glorify violence and teach children to enjoy inflicting the most gruesome forms of cruelty imaginable. Lieberman really wanted these games banned. However, even he realized that doing so would cause more of a First Amendment issue. So Lieberman decided to urge game companies to institute a rating system, and if they did not, the government would try to intervene. While Sega had already created a rating system, which rated games from GA general audience to MA 17, this was not a requirement across the board for all gaming companies. To placate Lieberman, gaming's other giant, Nintendo, had to get on board. Rather than assign ratings, Nintendo at this time was prone to just scrubbing games of any potentially offensive content, but it was affecting their bottom line. Gamers were voting with their dollars for Sega's faithful Mortal Kombat game, which outsold the edited Nintendo edition by a wide margin. When Lieberman convened his congressional hearing on December 9, 1993, he and other lawmakers assailed Nintendo for releasing what he considered still a violent video game. Various representatives from around the country spoke in support of Lieberman's views, including testimony from parent groups and child psychologists. Nintendo Senior Vice President Howard Lincoln and Sega of America marketing executive Bill White were primarily left to defend the video game industry. Lincoln pointed out that Nintendo lost money by sanitizing Mortal Kombat for the Super Nintendo, and White, representing Sega, claimed that the market was now showing more adult players than ever before. Even though the video game giants supposedly were on the same side, they did take shots at each other. During the hearing, White, representing Sega, showed that Nintendo was using a comically oversized bazooka for shooting games, while Nintendo claimed that Sega gears its games too much for adults. This infighting did little favors for their cause, and they quickly realized after the hearings they needed to embrace a rating system. The Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB, was proposed in July 1994, several months after the initial congressional hearing. The ESRB's rating system would inform consumers about the content of a game, categorizing titles by age appropriateness and providing detailed descriptions of any violence, sexual content, or language present in the game. The industry's association's rating system, which eventually ranged from E for everyone to A, adults only, wasn't ready in time for another Mortal Kombat marketing blitz, this time for Acclaim's Mortal Kombat 2 in September 1994. But due to the pending label, and likely because they lost millions on a sanitized version of the original, Nintendo opted to release the sequel without any edits. The ESRB rating system remains in use today. When the 12th iteration of Mortal Kombat was released in 2023, it received an M label. Again, there was criticism over the game's violence, but ironically, it didn't come from politicians this time. It came from the players themselves. Streamers who monetize playing video games have complained that the gore narrows their audience. The Mortal Kombat hearings and the creation of the ESRB set a precedent for how video games would be viewed and regulated in the years to come. For the first time, video games were subject to the kind of scrutiny traditionally reserved for film, television, and music. The hearings also sparked a wider debate about the role of violent media in society, and whether entertainment could be blamed for real-world aggression. In hindsight, the moral panic surrounding Mortal Kombat can be seen as part of a larger pattern, much like the concerns over comic books in the 1950s or rock music in the 1980s. And while the rating system has done little to satisfy concerns that violent entertainment leads to violent behavior, violent video games continue to sell and remain a dominant force in the industry. The ongoing success of Mortal Kombat and other similar franchises demonstrates that players are drawn to intense, action-packed experiences, regardless of the controversy surrounding them. Despite debates about the impact of video game violence, the industry's growth shows no signs of slowing, proving that with clear content ratings and consumer choice, these games will continue to thrive in the entertainment landscape.